Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Hello, and thank you for downloading Transcending Sport here on Wisp Sports. I'm Chris Stafford, and my guest on this episode is Irish sports journalist Cliona Foley. Cliona hosts a podcast called Off the Ball, which is based in Ireland, and it's recorded from the Off the Bench studio, focusing on women's sports. Now, she's been a lifelong sports journalist. She started off with a degree in physical education and English, but then did a postgrad in journalism, and now it's, I think, 30 years that she's been in the business of sports journalism. She's covered just about everything, including Olympic and Paralympic Games, European World Championships, and Ireland's own sports of hurling, football, and camogie. Like so many journalists that have been doing this for a while now, she too has made the transition from print media to digital media. And like so many of us, just recently she's been covering the Soccer World Cup. So I thought it'd be fun to hear a little bit more about her podcast and also get her take on the World Cup. Well, hello there, Cliona. Welcome to the program, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. Nice to be with you.
And just tell everybody where you're joining me from.
I'm joining you from County Kildare in Ireland.
And is that where you're from originally?
I'm from the next county down, actually, County Laois, from Ireland, right from the Midlands. And where we live now is in the heart of horse racing country in Ireland.
Indeed, it is. You've got some of the best racing studs in Europe, anyway, for sure. There, the famous Shergar, of course. Do you know how he disappeared? You know the story behind him.
Oh, I do. Where he disappeared from is about a mile from where I live. I'm not.
And you've
guilty.
nothing to do with
I'm
it.
not guilty. I'm not guilty with it, and it's still a mystery to everybody. But
Isn't it?
About a quarter mile up the road, if I go up there, I can look across and I can see the very, very famous Curragh Racecourse, which has just had an amazing makeover and had the Derby very recently. It's the home of flat racing in Ireland, and that famous stud isn't that far from there.
Yes, beautiful countryside. And it is, as you say, still a mystery as to what happened to that little horse, Shergar. In the dead of night there, he disappears.
All sorts of theories.
And it's a long while ago.
Yeah.
All sorts of theories, abounded, didn't they? But no bodies were found, as they say.
No, literally never, yeah.
No. So that's part of the mystery of Ireland, you see, isn't it? And the charm of Ireland, things happen. They're not always explainable.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's start by telling everybody a little bit about yourself there now, Cliona, because sport's been your thing for a while now. You must have a passion. Did you start doing sports for yourself at a young age?
Yes, I did. I grew up in a very sporty house. Both my parents were fascinated by sport, and we spent our lives going to matches or playing in matches or at the local tiny 9-hole golf course in a country village place called Adelaide. So all our lives were spent around sport, and I trained after school. I went to boarding school, and again, sport was a huge part of boarding school for us. It was our only time away from the books, so we played sport constantly in school. I did a lot of hockey and basketball, and then I went and I trained. I have a degree in physical education, so my degree is physical education and English, and I taught that for about 7 or 8 years, and then I went back to college and I did a postgrad in journalism because I wanted to be a sports writer.
You mentioned basketball there, so that was common, was it, in schools for girls to play?
Yes, in Ireland it is. In England, netball is a much more popular one, and the Women's World Cup, of course, is taking place at the moment in Liverpool in England. But actually in Ireland, for some reason, historically, basketball is way bigger, and basketball is a very big school sport in Irish schools, and we actually have a lot of our good talent go to America and go on scholarships to America, and we've even had one Irish woman who signed for the WNBA when it was in its infancy.
Well, we should explain, if people are listening now wondering what that noise is behind you, Cliona, you have to tell people it is your computer. It's something you cannot control.
Yes, it is. It's something we can't control. Sorry about that. It's grinding away happily here, trying to make the connection for us.
Well, you are in the countryside there. We'll allow for that. But maybe when it comes again, we'll pause and let it do its thing so we can edit that out. Let's see if we can do that so we don't frighten off the listeners here so early in the program.
Okay.
All right. And you mentioned there, of all the sports you did, and you set your mind on being a sports journalist then, was that like the first and only thing you did then? You've been a career journalist.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I taught PE and English for about 8 years. But my long-term goal was, I thought, well, if I get a grounding in physical education, I'll know lots of stuff I can bring to sports journalism. And then I went back after teaching for a while, got the money together to go back to college and did journalism. And then the only area I wanted to work in was sports writing, which was unusual. I was in a postgrad class of about 30 and wasn't very good at anything that we did because it was normally history and politics and all kinds of complicated things. And then one day we got a sports assignment to do, and I was top of the class. And one of the lecturers, I remember, looked at me and he said, "What do you want to do when you finish this course?" And I said, "Write about sport." And the whole class laughed. They just thought it was hilarious. I was the only one in the class interested in sport and the only one who wanted to be a sports writer.
Well, there you go. It just shows that women can do anything. You've been doing that for a while now, and you've written for the broadsheets as well as done your stint in radio too. Which do you prefer?
I think probably I'm a writer, and I think probably a long-form writer is probably what I'm best at as a sports feature writer. But just the way the business is going, I was a staff writer for the Irish Independent and all of its papers, the I&M papers, for the best part of 24 years. And in May 2015, I decided to go out on my own. I just think that the future of newspapers is very precarious everywhere in the world, and we're looking at all different forms of media now. So I thought maybe it was time just to try and stay a little bit ahead of it, because there's, I don't know, America, England's probably the same, an awful lot of redundancies in the print media in Ireland at the moment.
Indeed. Well, and not just in sports journalism, of course, we saw the demise through Fleet Street. You hark back to anybody who's listening from England who's familiar with Fleet Street and that the print media there, which dispersed a number of years ago now, and saw the beginning of digital media taking over, which has done considerably now. So it's very hard for freelancers, I think, to get a steady income. I know myself as a freelancer many, many years ago, you had to have a number of commissions to make any trips worthwhile.
Yeah, it's the same now, and I think possibly has got even worse now, because you have to almost be a multitasker now if you want to be a journalist. So you have to be you have to be able to write, you have to be able to record, you have to be able to film possibly. It's become, I remember in the old days, we once got from the union, we once got a magazine, and on the cover, there was a kind of a robot with, fixed camera in his head and in his eye, and he was called RoboHack. And I think we've all kind of become RoboHack in a way now. But if you're freelance, it's very difficult to survive on any one form now. You've got to be able to mix it up a bit.
You have to. And you've got to be able to, if you're doing video, do everything. I mean, write and present and be your own camera woman and run sound as well. You've got to do the whole package, haven't you?
It's a skill I haven't got yet at all, and I'm not sure that I'll ever get it. So yeah, exactly. You could probably do all these kind of things. I'm pretty basic still. I'm still probably in my heart, I'm a writer. That's what I am. But I just by accident have almost fallen into a bit of broadcasting, and because podcasting again was something that started to develop in the last 3 years, I just have sort of fallen into that as well.
With that is the case for so many people in journalism now. Podcasting is so popular wherever you look. The growth is just amazing that everybody and their brother has a podcast, it seems, because it's relatively easy to get started in podcasting. And I know from my own experiences now, I've been doing it from the start of podcasting, really, quite a few years ago now, but watching during that time the growth of podcasting and what it's given us, I think, a space, rather like when we went online and people started writing blogs, it brings in a different voice to, in our case, sports coverage. What do you enjoy about that format?
Well, I suppose I'm podcasting specifically about women's sport because I felt when I left the mainstream newspaper business, I felt, it was a very neglected area. I felt a lot of women's sport, particularly women's team sport, doesn't get a lot of coverage, and also lots of issues around female athletes and their own problems just aren't covered really by mainstream media a lot, or they certainly haven't been. So I thought, there's a possibility. What you said is exactly right. Podcasting is like online in that there's an infinite amount of space there. So it's up to you or any of us if we want to fill that space and then try and find and see if there are people who want to listen to it. So so that's what I liked about the notion of podcasting. I've always loved radio. I think radio is a beautiful medium. It's my favorite. I suppose I love it's very intimate. You're right there with the people and you listen very closely because it is radio. So when I started a podcast, and it's called Off the Bench, and it's in association with a sports radio company in Ireland called Off the Ball. Initially, we just started it as a little radio broadcast. So I literally went into a little tiny studio, would bring in a guest, got somebody to record it for me, and it was very intimate and small, and it was very easy to do. And it is very easy to do. Podcasting is very easy to do. Now it's developed. They have their own customized studio. Off the Ball have now, and they allow us to go in there as Off the Bench, and it's recorded on YouTube and all the social media channels, so it can be broadcast as well. So we have that option now, which in some ways is less intimate than the original audio podcast. I still love a radio podcast, and I think that's how a lot of people consume them, as a radio format in their ear.
They do. Indeed, they do. Yeah, absolutely. Podcast apps are where it's at, aren't they? Because there's so many different apps that you can have podcasting programs on. So, yeah, it's a whole new world there. And as you mentioned, you're in the same space as we are. We exclusively covering women's sport. So what would be your main format there then, Cliona? Would it be interviews, or would you just have one host yourself? How do you normally run the show?
I host the show primarily, but it varies. So if there's a really good feature interview, we will do that, bring somebody in and spend up to an hour doing a really good feature interview with them. But then sometimes we would have a panel of guests as athletes, so we might have 3 athletes or 2 athletes from one sport. I've got some boxers coming in fairly soon. Yesterday I just did one. Ireland had only one person at the women's football FIFA World Cup. Her name is Michelle O'Neill. She's an assistant referee, and she actually got the final, which was incredible. She works with an international refereeing crew, an Italian and a French woman. So they got the final of the Women's World Cup. So I had her in yesterday, and we did an exclusive interview with her on her experiences of being a referee, what she faced in the men's game when she started, what she said to Megan Rapinoe just before the final. So sometimes we have, one-on-one interviews. And then sometimes we also, if there are lots of issues that we want to discuss, or there's been controversy at home or abroad in some particular area of women's sport, and usually I can be joined by other journalists come in and have a chat. So we're a very mixed format. And when we started out, we were just once a month, and now we're twice a month. But we have to admit that sometimes we're a little bit hit and miss because in terms of the exact timing, but we're usually out twice a month.
Oh, grand. And I'm sure you're having fun with it too. You mentioned there that your ref spoke to Megan. I hope she said good luck.
Well, she did. She was actually, it was her job to check she was on this side of the American team in the tunnel before they went out. And so it was her job to check all of their gear, the studs and stuff. Yeah. Right. And when she got to Rapinoe looked her straight in the eye and said, "Are you ready for this?" And to which our referee replied, "I was born ready," which I thought was the perfect answer to give to Megan Rapinoe.
What a tremendous final. Did you watch a lot of the games there?
Yes, yeah, I watched a lot of it. We were really fortunate because it was in European time, if you like, so very little time difference for us. Unusually, it was covered on free-to-air TV hugely in Europe. So we had RTE covered every single game live. Our local, that's the national TV station of Ireland. They covered every game live, which was incredible because they could afford the rights. They were very clever. They got the rights to it, and also BBC had every game live. So there was wall-to-wall coverage of it, and that's quite unusual for women's football to see as much, and the reaction to it was pretty amazing. So we were really lucky to be able to see it like that this year on free-to-air TV.
Yeah, and of course we got it over here. We got all of it, really. I think 2 different channels actually covered it. And for those of us who really got hooked in a way, maybe we hadn't been so hooked to soccer before, we didn't really care the time difference. You know, I know for myself, it was just magic. It was one of the best women's sports events, I think, ever, because of the incredible coverage too. I mean, breaking records for TV audiences, which was, you know, what women's sports needs. I mean, I think you'll agree that not only was it a tremendous soccer tournament and a tremendous women's sports event, but it went far beyond that in terms of generating, you know, a wider audience, an audience that maybe wouldn't otherwise even watch soccer, much less women's sports. You know, they brought in a whole new one. And it speaks to that again, you know, if you build it, they will come. You know, when you talk about, you know, this vicious circle of the media, you know, buying rights, making it, you know, making paywalls, making it exclusive, rather like the cricket. I don't know if you followed the cricket recently. There was the World Cup, the Men's World Cup. And the final was
with an Irishman captaining England, yeah.
Yeah, well done.
Morgan was Irish, yeah. We got the plug in there.
Of course. But what a fantastic event that was. Now, that was behind a paywall until they decided to take the paywall down on for the final, and they brought in a wider audience because they were playing second fiddle to. You know, there was other events, like not least of all the men's singles finals at Wimbledon and the British Formula One Grand Prix, and so they knew they had to take the paywall down if they were going to get you know, a decent audience for the cricket file. It was a shame those 3 major events clashed, wasn't it?
It was an extraordinary day. I mean, talk about a Super Sunday. They often talk about Super Sunday in European sport, particularly in one of the pay channels calls practically every Sunday Super Sunday. But last Sunday was a sensational Sunday. And also in Ireland, we have Gaelic games. We have games, our own indigenous games. We have Gaelic football, hurling, camogie, and ladies football. And it was a huge weekend of championship for them as well. So we had people.
Oh, was it?
Everyone was like triple screening, and some people went to 2 huge matches. They were All Ireland hurling quarterfinals in Croke Park, which is our national stadium, which holds over 80,000. And people, I came across a few people who went to both of the big games, and when they came home, the Wimbledon men's final was still on. They thought it would be over. It was still going, which was amazing, and they caught the last half hour of it. So it was a super Sunday. One of the things that really interested me about the Women's World Cup coverage as well was not, I mean, the really interesting thing is that it's become so expensive for broadcasters to buy major men's sporting events that there is an opportunity there now for women's sports, you know, because they're not as expensive to buy. And that's exactly what happened to the Women's World Cup in Europe. And that's why it turned out in the end then to be a huge success, because a lot of countries had it free to air and were able to use it so extensively. And the other thing that really interested me about it, I'm sure you probably see it, and I've noticed this in America before I've seen it in Ireland, was the quality of the analysis and the way it was analysed, and the fact that really gender wasn't mentioned. It was analysed, and the players and the games were analysed exactly as a men's game would be. So it was very analytical, you know, it was just very, you know, as I said, gender and personalities didn't usually come into it. They just talked about them as footballers. And that's probably the first time I've seen that, whereas I've been in America and you'd flick through channels, and whether it would be softball or colleges basketball or whatever, I'm always delighted by the quality of analysis that I see of female team sports in America. They just treat them, you know, exactly the same as they would the men. But that was noticeable here, which was a big thing for women's sport. Everybody was really happy with that.
Yeah, long overdue, and it did happen here. I was watching, as I said, most of the matches on Fox, And I thought our commentator was very good, our play-by-play commentator, and the analysis was superb. And as you say, it's all about the athletes and not their gender now, which is as it should be. And this has, I think, opened a lot of doors in many ways. Of course, over here, we're hoping that it's opened the door even wider to the conversation about equal pay for the U.S. women's national team, which have been in the law courts now for quite a while, trying to put their case. And I think they've got to the point now where they speak for themselves on the pitch. There cannot be an argument against equality, especially given the inferior performance. I have to say, inferior performance by their counterparts, the men's team over here. So, if it was the other way round, what a different conversation we'd be having. But right now, I think they've got a stronger case than ever for equality. As Megan Rapinoe said, it's not about equality. That's not the conversation now. We've moved on from that.
Yeah, well, we would, and on off the bench on my podcast, we would have actually, we've been speaking for the last few years. Just, we have referred to the US women's team and their battle and that class action that they're taking, and just how important historically that is for an awful lot of women's teams and women's sporting structures to see what happens with that case. But I mean, that was the fantastic thing I think about America. First of all, was that they withstood all of the pressure. They defended their title, and they have given absolutely every reason that their case to be recognised as the greater earning power for USA soccer is now clearly there. So there's just no argument to it. But I think, and it was a very interesting narrative as well, because even people, as you said, who weren't interested in soccer, because of that, also that political and that equality debate that was going on around it, they started to watch them, to see who they were and what this was about. And then I think God, fell in love with the game as well. So that's a huge kudos to them for doing all of that, for withstanding all that pressure and still, rising above it all and coming out on top. And interesting enough, actually, I've got to say, they're playing a victory tour. People probably know in August, and their first game, Ireland are going out to play them, because Ireland have played them in the past over the years, so they have a bit of a relationship there. So they're going to play them in Pasadena on the 3rd of August. Our women's team are very young and they're in transition, but actually their European or their World Cup qualifying group, they were in it, and they drew away. They held Holland to a scoreless draw in Holland, which will tell you how close they got. So when Holland made the final, that's a big thing for them now to see. Look, we were able to pit ourselves against them. And the Women's European Championships are coming up in 2021, and their qualifying group start. So they're really looking forward to going to America and playing. They'll probably get beaten. They know they're probably going to get beaten, but what an experience now to get the chance to be the first ones to play the world champions. It's amazing.
Well, it absolutely is. I was going to say that's awfully brave of them to be the first ones to step up right after the World Cup and take them on.
Well, nothing to lose, because that's one of the good things.
Go for it, girls. I think that's tremendous. And hopefully they get a really good audience and audience attendance at the venue in Pasadena there, as well as some TV coverage.
That's a big capacity. Yeah. So that's all been very exciting. So it's probably this. It would have been expected, I think, that America would be captured by the FIFA Women's World Cup, but not perhaps by Europe. But so many European teams made the quarterfinals, and then, as I said, it was so accessible. And accessibility is a huge thing. We have in Ireland, just in the past year, a new movement started. It's called 20 by 20, and one of its its principle, and it's a not-for-profit organisation, and it's hoping to increase by the year 2020. It hopes to increase the participation rates amongst women and girls in sport, their participation rates in officiating, in governing, in all areas of sport. And so what are their, they've stolen, I suppose, that motto. I think Billie Jean King certainly used it in sporting context, which is, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so that's the big thing about that FIFA World Cup now, and even the referee, actually, hilariously, she told me that, she's getting approached on the street by men and women who saw her performing at the World Cup final, and saying she's a role model for their kids, which is really interesting.
That's fabulous, yes, because that's a whole different conversation, isn't it, about female officials in sport, not least of all in football. I want to just go in two different directions here, so we're going to circle back in a minute. But there's a question I was going to ask you about, the coverage of sports, because we've got so much that's free and available online now through social media platforms. But before I do that, tell me what your standout moments were in the World Cup there, Cliona.
Oh, that's a good question. That is a really good question. I'm not sure that I can single out a few. There was a brilliant game. Australia came back from 2-0 down, and now it escapes me who they played. But just the fact that they came back and they won a game 3-2, I think was it Argentina? I can't remember who it was against. That was a really great game to me. I loved seeing Jamaica play. They're the first Caribbean team to play in a World Cup, and there's just something about Caribbean people and the joy that they bring to sport. I covered track and field for many years, obviously, and covered a lot of Caribbean athletes. I just thought that was a great moment for them as well, when they, that moment when they got that first goal. And I think Thailand was the same when they got those first goals. And people looked at it and said, "Oh, you shouldn't be praising. That's ridiculous. What are you doing? Women shouldn't be celebrating or crying because they got their first goal ever." But people didn't really understand the narrative and the background to that, and that Jamaican team's story, with Bob Marley's daughter funding them, and as I said, being the first women's team from the Caribbean to play in the World Cup final. They're the kind of little moments I think that stood out for me. There were loads of brilliant scores. There was some fantastic defending. I loved it. I thought France would be way better than they were. I thought Germany might make the final. So it had everything. It had surprises. It had shock results. It had controversy. And I think great sporting events need that. And women's sport needs that. It should never be patronized. It should always be able to stand on its own. And apart from the quality of the play, it also needs to have all of those narratives that attract people to sport naturally. Those moments of tension, those great narratives of comebacks and fightbacks, and even something like the American women winning that first game, and there was huge controversy over that. You probably know that as well in Europe. People saying, "Oh, they shouldn't have been celebrating." But again, people had to learn the context, and when they did, that they were breaking records, that nobody ever scored as many goals in a World Cup finals game. All of that stuff fed into the fact that people got interested for the sake of the game and the athletes that they were looking at. So that, I suppose, in some ways, what made it for me was that people got interested and they didn't care who was playing. They got interested in football, and they didn't see the gender.
That's absolutely true. And I think that it's the emotional element which women bring to sport, which men don't exhibit in the same way, because just the difference in gender. It's not a commentary on it, it's just the difference. And then, you've got those, as you say, the highs and lows, the drama. And there was so much drama, which sporting arenas have. I mean, that's the whole point of sport, the contest, the fight, but the emotions, I think, that were brought to it from the different teams for different reasons, as you say, they had different narratives. And once you realized what that narrative was, it began to tell the story for the viewer. And you mentioned there, the US celebrating after scoring all those goals against Thailand. You had to feel for Thailand a little bit, but on the other hand, that was a story, that was a game in context, that was what it was. And for me, so looking at some standout moments, I'd have to say Sam Kerr and she scored 6 goals, three goals with her head and 3 with her feet. I mean, she was extraordinary. Those headers, the anticipation which makes a good sportsman very good, or a good sportswoman very good. An athlete just gives them the edge. Is that incredible anticipation which Sam has. Of course, she's now back playing for the Chicago Red Stars here. She's back to club. Even before the World Cup was over, she was back here playing in the US for her club team.
It was a shame to see the Australians not go further. I would have liked to have seen them because I think they had troubles before the World Cup. They changed in management. They've lots of other things, but she is a superstar as well. Yeah, and Chris, I'm slightly disagreeing with you on one thing, which is the lack of emotion in male sport. I think the tide is turning, and I see in men's sport now. I think, particularly in team sport, I think this is where the difference usually has been before. But I do see a change in that men are now expressing more emotion and getting more emotional, and I think that's a really nice thing to see, and I think that's a really interesting thing to see. Like, for example, Liverpool and the reaction of Jurgen Klopp when they won the European Cup this year, and if people hadn't seen it, you had a whole team lined up in front of the famous Kop, all these men in tears, and I do think it's very interesting now that men, in some ways, perhaps in sport, are less afraid to show their emotions now, and it's become a more maybe diverse and welcoming place for other men as well.
Yeah, I'll meet you there on that. I really will, because, you think of men not being as emotional as women generally, right? I mean, we don't, but you're absolutely right there. So I think that's great to see. I agree with you. It's great to see it, because whether you're men or women, you invest so much in that performance. And this is why I think, the women on the US women's hockey team, they were celebrating so much, beating Thailand, in the way that they did, because it is the World Cup. This is not just a club game, bottom of the league or whatever. This is the World Cup. Just before we finish talking about it, I mean, we could go on with this conversation for much longer, because there's so much to talk about with this Soccer World Cup. And I think the goal, for me, it was interesting. I wish I'd have had a bet with somebody, because I spotted the Netherlands early on in the tournament and thought, they're going to drill deep here. They're going to go far. They were just one of my standout teams, and it didn't surprise me that they made it all the way. Like you, I was disappointed in France that they didn't have more in their armory, but that was an amazingly emotional game itself. That match against the US, what a fantastic game that was, in terms of when you heard the national anthems and the reception and a sellout crowd. What a fantastic sporting event that was. And then, of course, going on to the final, for me, the standout player that didn't get enough recognition, but she finally did, and I thought it was a wonderful, fitting end to her for the World Cup, was Rosie Labelle, who for the
oh my goodness,
what a
fantastic
little terrier.
I know. She's so petite and so strong. She's like a piece of steel, a tiny little piece of steel. Yeah, I thought she was superb throughout the tournament, and I was so delighted to see her doing well. And Tobin Heath as well, I thought, came into her own during the tournament and got better as the tournament went on. Yeah, yes. Yeah. But you're absolutely right about Lavelle, and for her to be involved and essentially involved in the final was fantastic. We would know of the Netherlands here, first of all, because they're European champions, and also because they were in Ireland's qualifying group. And didn't actually top Ireland's qualifying group. Norway topped Ireland's qualifying group, actually, when they were trying to qualify for the World Cup. So to see Norway make the quarterfinals and to see the Netherlands go on. But a lot of people in Europe would have been watching that Dutch team. And actually, I would have said they didn't play well throughout the tournament until they almost produced their best performances in the last two games. But a lot of them, like there's a big gang of that Dutch team play for Arsenal in the Super League in England and play with some of the Irish girls in that Arsenal team. So we would be familiar with them, and we would have been very familiar with the French team, because a lot of that French team are on the Lyon team that won the Champions League in Europe this year, and were an absolutely brilliant team, and of course had Ada Hegerberg, the Norwegian superstar who won the Ballon d'Or this year, but won't play for Norway at the moment for her own reasons, about the way the women's team are being developed and treated. So that the Lyon team are a fantastic team for people to watch in the future, and that's why I think people in Europe are so familiar with the French team as well and expected them to do really well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. Yes, of course, you have a very different perspective that we do here. But I think we'll agree that was one heck of a sporting event there for a few weeks, and I missed it already. Do you?
Yeah. I mean, I lost a lot of time to it. I was looking at my diary last week thinking, God, I didn't do a lot of work last week. And then I realized I spent a lot of it over the last 3 weeks watching football. You know what? The great sorrow for us, Chris, is that we don't see the American women's club games. And I think, you know, there probably could be a market for that now, because they really have, because that event was in Europe, seen by so much of Europe. I think there's a market there now for one of the we get stuff on ESPN, and we get some American sports, men's sports, but I think there's a market there, somebody to be showing the women's league in England, in America now.
Well, you have segued perfectly into the other part of my question that I was going to come to, is the coverage, the broadcast versus the online and the social media and the free to air coverage of sport now. We're focusing on women's sports because that's our space here. But what do you think about the future in terms of accessibility? If you're going to build an audience, if you make them pay for it, will they come? If you give it to them free, would they be more inclined to watch it? And would they stay with you? Not just because it's free, but will you build the audience for that sport and more women's sport?
Yeah, well, I think I always make this distinction. I keep saying it. I know, I'm sorry for repeating myself. I do make the distinction about team sport, women's team sport, and women in sport. Women as elite athletes. For example, I always say, if you go to the Olympics, you don't get up and go to the bar when the women's 100-meter runners come out. You value them equally to the men's. But in team sports, for some reason, and there are historic reasons for it, women's soccer was banned in England for, 50 years by the English FA. So there's historic reasons why people undervalue or have a different opinion of women's team sports, and they compare them to men's. Which is a terrible pity, I think, because they miss a lot of great sport. But so for that reason, the audience isn't as large. We know that people don't go to watch women's team sport as much as they go to watch men, and they don't watch it. They don't see as much of it on TV. And you have that chicken and egg thing, which is broadcasters saying, well, if we show it and people don't, people aren't interested enough to watch it, so why should we show it? So this is the whole chicken and egg we have with a lot of women's sport. How do you build the audience? You have to build the audience to persuade the media to cover it, that it's worth covering, or that there would be an audience for it if they cover it. So these are the complications that you have. You have it in any minority sport, I think. And you covered a question for many years, and possibly that's an issue that they deal with as well. I think, first of all, the growth of social media and online and the platforms is fantastic, because it allows sports to do their own coverage, if you like, to give it to their fans. But there's a problem with that, and that is that if you're only preaching to the converted, then how do you convert the others? And how do you introduce your sport to them? So I feel it is important for it to be free to air. And that's how you will grow a bigger audience, because I love so much, that I'd follow it anyway. Do you know what I mean? But how do I persuade somebody else to follow it if they can't see it, and if they can't see the great athletes and the great narratives the great dramas, you said, that are within it? So I worry sometimes with women's sport now that because we're doing so much within it, organizations are producing, lots of, streaming services. People can go and see it on the streaming services. But again, you have to be careful that you're not creating a vacuum there for people who are already interested and not reaching, because the key to it, I think, is if you want to grow your sport, is to reach a bigger audience. And so how do you grow the bigger audience is the big question. In Ireland, we have, as I said, we've got Gaelic sports. We have our own indigenous sports, and ladies Gaelic football is a really, really popular sport. There's nearly 200,000 people playing it in the country, which is a very big sport for Ireland. It would almost be the equivalent, I would think, of soccer in America, and women's soccer. And our All-Ireland finals are growing, are gathering huge crowds. So last year, the All-Ireland women's finals, there are 3 different grades. They're all played together in Croke Park, our national stadium. They attracted a record crowd last year of 50,141. It was a sensational, huge crowd to have, the equivalent of a World Cup final crowd to have for your national championships. And that is fantastic. But the problem is that when it comes to regular games, even in the lead up to that, even into the semi-finals of that, the crowd isn't a fraction of that. So we've got to use that.
Yes, I think it's a balance of both. It's an interesting dichotomy, and I'd like to talk more about this. Will you come back on the show again?
Yes, it'd be my pleasure.
I think we should continue this conversation. There's so much more when it comes to women's sports, Cliona. But for now, I'm going to wrap up this show. But I really would like you to come back. So just keep us in mind, will you? Don't be a stranger.
Absolutely not. It was a pleasure to talk to you, guys. Thank you.
Conversations from the world of women's sports. This is Wisp Sports Radio.
Well, thanks again to Cliona. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please do share and subscribe and follow on social media at Wisp Sports. And of course, you can always reach us here if you have any comments or questions or suggestions for guests or topics that you think we should be covering here on any of our podcasts. Just drop us an email to info@wispsports.com. Until the next time, thank you for listening and turning up the volume on women's sports. Goodbye for now.